America didn't just change because of heroes. Sometimes it changed because criminals made the rulebook look embarrassingly unfinished. Watch closely, because these weird crimes didn't just shock people, they rewired the country, one terrible decision at a time. 1. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping was the crime that made America realize criminals had discovered a cheat code: state lines. In 1932, Charles Lindbergh's 20-month-old son was taken from the family home in New Jersey, and the case instantly became a national obsession. At first, the FBI could only help from the sidelines, because kidnapping was mostly a state matter. Imagine the most famous baby in America vanishes, and federal agents are standing there like they forgot the password to their own job. After the child's body was found, public outrage exploded. Congress moved fast, and the Federal Kidnapping Act, nicknamed the Lindbergh Law, gave federal authorities power to investigate kidnappings when victims were believed to have been taken across state lines. The crime was horrifying, but its legal aftermath changed law enforcement forever. One terrible ladder, one ransom note, and suddenly America upgraded kidnapping from local nightmare to federal emergency. 2. The 1982 Tylenol murders changed something Americans now barely notice: the annoying little safety seal you fight with before taking medicine. 7 people in the Chicago area died after taking extra-strength Tylenol capsules that had been poisoned with cyanide. The killer was never convicted, which makes the story even creepier, because the villain didn't just attack people, he attacked trust itself. Before this, buying medicine off a shelf felt normal. Afterward, every bottle suddenly looked suspicious, like it was auditioning for a crime scene. Johnson & Johnson recalled millions of bottles and worked with officials to introduce tamper-resistant packaging, including foil seals and other visible protections. Those features soon became the standard for over-the-counter medicine. So every time you peel plastic, break a seal, remove cotton, and wonder why opening aspirin requires the patience of a locksmith, thank this case. It proved America needed packaging that basically says, "Please confirm no maniac touched this." 3. Miranda versus Arizona began with a criminal case and ended by changing almost every police show ever made. Ernesto Miranda was arrested in Arizona and confessed during interrogation, but he had not been properly told he had the right to remain silent or the right to an attorney. The Supreme Court looked at that and basically said, maybe confessions shouldn't come with surprise constitutional violations. In 1966, the court ruled that statements made during custodial interrogation are generally admissible only if suspects are first clearly informed of their rights and knowingly waive them. That decision gave America the Miranda warning, the famous, "You have the right to remain silent" speech that now gets delivered in squad cars, interrogation rooms, and every TV drama with fluorescent lighting. The strange part is that one man's case became a national script for police procedure. Before Miranda, silence was a legal right. After Miranda, it became a sentence every American can quote like a commercial jingle. 4. In 1933, one kidnapping attempt failed, but it still changed the way banks protected their customers forever. George Machine Gun Kelly and his gang kidnapped wealthy Oklahoma oil man Charles Urschel, expecting an easy fortune. What they didn't expect was their victim quietly turning into the smartest witness imaginable. Even while blindfolded, Urschel counted footsteps, memorized sounds, noticed airplane routes overhead, recognized the smell of nearby oil fields, and even felt the texture of the ground beneath his shoes. Meanwhile, investigators followed the ransom money by tracing serial numbers on the bills, something that had rarely been done on such a scale before. Kelly was eventually captured, proving that organized criminals were no longer playing against sleepy local sheriffs, but against increasingly sophisticated federal investigators. The case became one of the FBI's greatest early victories and demonstrated how forensic thinking, financial tracking, and cooperation between agencies could defeat even the country's most notorious gangsters. Sometimes the criminal isn't beaten by bigger guns. He's beaten by a victim who refuses to stop paying attention. 5. The Watergate break-in looked almost laughably amateur at first. In June 1972, 5 burglars were caught inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. They carried cameras, bugging devices, cash, and enough suspicious equipment to make even the night security guard wonder what kind of maintenance crew worked after midnight wearing business suits. What seemed like an ordinary burglary quickly unraveled into one of the biggest political scandals in American history. Investigative journalists followed the money, congressional hearings exposed secret recordings, and prosecutors uncovered an organized effort to cover up the crime. The investigation eventually forced President Richard Nixon to resign, the only American president ever to do so. More importantly, Watergate permanently changed campaign finance laws, strengthened government oversight, increased public access to official records, and reminded Americans that even the most powerful office in the country isn't supposed to operate above the law. One clumsy burglary ended up rewriting how government accountability worked. 6. In 1978, thieves at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport pulled off what became known as the Lufthansa heist, stealing nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry from the airline's cargo terminal. At the time, it was the largest cash robbery in American history, and the crime looked almost effortless. The robbers knew exactly where the money was stored, how long security would take to respond, and which employees could be intimidated into cooperating. But the robbery quickly became a disaster for the criminals themselves. Instead of quietly disappearing, many gang members started buying expensive cars, flashy jewelry, and luxury homes almost overnight. Their sudden wealth attracted unwanted attention, and internal paranoia soon proved even more dangerous than the FBI. Several people connected to the robbery were murdered by their own associates to eliminate potential witnesses. The case exposed serious weaknesses in airport cargo security, leading airlines and airports to strengthen surveillance, employee background checks, access controls, and cash transportation procedures. In the end, greed destroyed the gang long before the police managed to. 7. In 1986, Miami became the center of one of the most important shootouts in FBI history. Two heavily armed bank robbers, William Maddox and Michael Platt, exchanged gunfire with 8 FBI agents during what should have been a routine vehicle stop. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Although both criminals were eventually killed, 2 agents lost their lives and 5 others were seriously wounded. The investigation revealed uncomfortable truths. Some FBI agents were carrying weapons that lacked sufficient stopping power, while body armor, tactical training, and communication procedures all needed improvement. The shootout forced the FBI to completely reevaluate how agents prepared for violent confrontations. It accelerated the adoption of more effective firearms, improved tactical training, better protective equipment, and extensive research into handgun ammunition performance. The criminals never intended to reshape federal law enforcement, but every modern FBI firearms training program still carries lessons learned from that terrifying morning in Miami. 8 Frank Abagnale Jr. never robbed banks with a gun. Instead, he robbed them with confidence, fake documents, and an unbelievable amount of nerve. During the 1960s, while still in his teens and early 20s, he successfully posed as an airline pilot, lawyer, college professor, and even a physician, cashing fraudulent checks worth millions of dollars across multiple countries. His greatest weapon wasn't violence, it was the fact that businesses trusted paperwork far more than they verified it. Banks often accepted checks simply because the documents looked official, and the person presenting them acted like he belonged there. After his eventual arrest, financial institutions realized just how vulnerable they were to sophisticated forgery. His crimes helped encourage major improvements in check verification, document security, signature authentication, and identity verification procedures throughout the banking industry. Ironically, after serving prison time, Abagnale later worked with banks and law enforcement as a consultant on fraud prevention. Few criminals have spent the second half of their careers teaching people how to stop someone exactly like themselves. 9. In 1989, brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez shocked America by murdering their wealthy parents inside their Beverly Hills mansion with shotguns. At first, the brothers appeared to be grieving sons. They cried in public, attended funerals, and acted devastated. Then they began spending extraordinary amounts of money. Luxury watches, expensive cars, restaurants, overseas travel, and lavish shopping sprees quickly attracted attention. Investigators eventually questioned how 2 supposedly heartbroken young men had suddenly become enthusiastic millionaires. The televised trials captivated the nation, not only because of the shocking family violence, but also because of the brothers' defense, which alleged years of severe abuse inside the household. The case sparked enormous public debate about domestic abuse, psychological trauma, family violence, and the legal standards surrounding self-defense and premeditated murder. It also transformed courtroom television, turning criminal trials into national entertainment while raising difficult questions about how media coverage influences public opinion before a jury even reaches a verdict. 10 before. September 11, 2001, airport security looked remarkably different. Family members could accompany travelers directly to departure gates. Identification checks were relatively simple, and screening procedures focused mostly on preventing hijackings rather than suicide attacks. Then, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners, killing nearly 3,000 people and forever changing aviation security in the United States. While the attacks were acts of terrorism rather than ordinary crime, they triggered the most sweeping security reforms in American transportation history. The federal government created the Transportation Security Administration, federalized passenger screening, reinforced cockpit doors, expanded intelligence sharing, introduced stricter baggage inspections, and dramatically increased watch list monitoring. Travelers suddenly found themselves removing shoes, limiting liquids, showing identification repeatedly, and arriving hours before departure. Many of those routines still exist today. Nearly every passenger flying through an American airport continues to experience security procedures that were born from the lessons of one devastating day that permanently changed how the nation thinks about public safety. In 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper walked onto a Northwest Orient Airlines flight carrying nothing more suspicious than a briefcase and a calm attitude. Once the plane was in the air, he quietly informed a flight attendant that the briefcase contained a bomb. He demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes, and unlike movie villains, he never raised his voice or fired a shot. After the passengers were released in Seattle, the plane took off again with a small crew, heading south. Somewhere over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, Cooper lowered the rear staircase of the Boeing 727 and disappeared into the storm with the ransom money strapped to his body. He was never found. The bizarre hijacking stunned the nation and triggered major aviation security reforms. Airports introduced mandatory passenger screening, baggage inspections became more thorough, and Boeing eventually modified its aircraft with a simple but brilliant device known as the Cooper vane, preventing rear staircases from being opened during flight. One polite hijacker managed to permanently redesign both airport security and commercial airplanes. 12. During the 1920s, America tried to outlaw alcohol, but instead created one of the greatest criminal business opportunities in history. Prohibition was supposed to reduce crime and improve public morals. Instead, organized gangs discovered they could make fortunes by supplying illegal liquor to millions of willing customers. No criminal took greater advantage than Al Capone in Chicago. His organization earned millions through bootlegging, bribery, gambling, and violence, while corrupting politicians and police officers along the way. Ironically, authorities struggled to convict him for murder or organized crime despite overwhelming public suspicion. In the end, the government finally imprisoned Capone for something almost laughably ordinary compared to his reputation: tax evasion. The entire Prohibition era taught America a painful lesson about unintended consequences. Rather than eliminating alcohol, the law transformed ordinary drinking into a black market industry worth enormous profits. The experience influenced future debates about regulating illegal markets and expanded the role of federal investigators in pursuing financial crimes when traditional criminal prosecutions proved difficult. 13. In 1975, one of the strangest bank robberies in American history unfolded without a single dramatic gunfight. Patricia Hearst, the granddaughter of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, had been kidnapped the previous year by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a small radical group with revolutionary ambitions far larger than its membership. Months after her abduction, surveillance cameras captured an astonishing sight. Hearst appeared inside a San Francisco bank carrying a rifle and participating in an armed robbery alongside her captors. The nation couldn't believe what it was seeing. Had she willingly joined the group, or was she acting under coercion after months of psychological manipulation and abuse? Her trial became one of the first major public discussions about brainwashing, coercive control, and the psychological effects of prolonged captivity. While legal experts debated criminal responsibility, the case permanently changed how courts, psychologists, and law enforcement considered victims who commit crimes under extreme influence. It forced Americans to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Not every criminal story fits neatly into the categories of innocent victim or willing offender. 14. In 1950, Boston experienced one of the strangest robberies ever recorded, and it remained unsolved for decades. 11 men carefully planned the robbery of the Brinks Armored Car Depot, escaping with more than $2.7 million in cash, checks, and securities, making it the largest cash robbery in American history at the time. The planning was almost obsessive. The gang spent years studying the building, rehearsing their movements, timing guards, and minimizing evidence. They even wore matching disguises and gloves, leaving investigators with almost nothing to work with. For years, the case frustrated the FBI as the robbers remained silent and avoided spending their stolen money too quickly. Eventually, the conspiracy unraveled because one participant decided prison loyalty wasn't worth a lifetime behind bars and confessed just days before the statute of limitations expired. The Brinks robbery became a textbook example of patient criminal investigation, proving that solving major crimes sometimes requires years of persistence rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Criminals can plan for almost everything except the moment someone decides to start talking. 15. In 1919, a single bomb explosion outside the home of Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer helped launch one of the most controversial law enforcement campaigns in American history. The attack was part of a wave of anarchist bombings targeting government officials and prominent businessmen across the country. Fear spread quickly, fueled by recent immigration, labor unrest, and memories of World War I. Palmer responded aggressively, authorizing sweeping investigations and mass arrests of suspected radicals. Thousands of people were detained during what became known as the Palmer Raids, although many had committed no violent crimes at all. The government often relied on weak evidence, broad suspicions, and political beliefs rather than actual criminal conduct. While the bombings were real, the response sparked fierce criticism from lawyers, judges, and civil liberties advocates who argued constitutional protections were being ignored. The episode became a lasting reminder that extraordinary crimes can sometimes produce government actions that later generations view as excessive, forcing America to constantly balance national security against individual rights. 16. In 2002, a sniper case turned ordinary American routines into terrifying acts of courage. For 3 weeks, residents around Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia lived under constant fear as random people were shot while pumping gas, mowing lawns, loading groceries, or walking through parking lots. The attacks were carried out by John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, who fired from inside a modified blue Chevrolet Caprice with a small firing hole hidden in the trunk. Because the victims appeared completely random, investigators initially struggled to identify any pattern. Schools canceled outdoor activities, businesses lost customers, and parents taught children to zigzag across parking lots instead of walking in straight lines. The investigation became one of the largest coordinated law enforcement operations in modern American history, involving local police, state agencies, and federal authorities sharing information at unprecedented levels. After the killers were captured, emergency communication systems, multi-agency cooperation, and rapid intelligence sharing were significantly strengthened. The case proved that fear itself could become one of a criminal's most powerful weapons. 17. The Great Train Robbery usually makes people think of the Wild West, but one of America's most influential railroad crimes happened much later. In 1963, members of the so-called Great Train Robbery Gang in Britain stole millions from a Royal Mail train, but American law enforcement closely studied the investigation because rail cargo theft remained a major concern in the United States. Around the same period, organized cargo theft rings in America targeted freight trains carrying electronics, automobiles, and valuable consumer goods. Criminals discovered that railroads stretched across thousands of miles with countless isolated locations perfect for theft. Federal investigators responded by increasing cooperation between railroad police, the FBI, and local authorities, while expanding surveillance and cargo tracking methods. These cases helped modernize freight security and encourage companies to adopt improved inventory systems and tamper evidence seals. Today, sophisticated tracking technology follows valuable shipments across the country, but many of those security measures trace their origins back to criminals who viewed long freight trains as rolling warehouses waiting to be looted. 18. In 1984, a group of thieves in California committed what became one of the largest cash robberies ever attempted in the United States, when they stole approximately $11 million from the Wells Fargo depot in West Hartford, Connecticut. The robbery was carefully organized by members of the Puerto Rican nationalist group Los Macheteros, who intended to finance political activities rather than personal luxury. Unlike many spectacular robberies, this one relied less on Hollywood-style action and more on patient planning, insider knowledge, and disciplined execution. Investigators spent years following financial trails, interviewing suspects, and tracing hidden cash across multiple jurisdictions. The case highlighted how politically motivated crimes could overlap with organized financial theft, requiring closer cooperation between intelligence agencies and traditional criminal investigators. It also encouraged financial institutions to strengthen vault procedures, employee screening, and surveillance technology. The robbery demonstrated that stealing millions doesn't always involve dramatic gunfights. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who spend far more time studying security manuals than practicing with weapons. In 2013, the Boston Marathon bombing transformed one of America's most celebrated sporting events into an enormous crime scene within seconds. Two homemade pressure cooker bombs exploded near the marathon finish line, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds more. The attack shocked the country, but what followed became a landmark demonstration of modern criminal investigation. Thousands of photographs, surveillance videos, cell phone recordings, and eyewitness accounts were analyzed almost around the clock. Investigators publicly released images of 2 unidentified suspects, leading to an intense manhunt that unfolded across the Boston area. The search ended after a police officer was killed, one suspect died during a confrontation, and the surviving brother was captured hiding inside a boat. The investigation showcased the growing role of digital evidence, public surveillance cameras, and community cooperation in solving major crimes. It also accelerated improvements in emergency medical response, event security planning, and information sharing among law enforcement agencies responsible for protecting large public gatherings. 20. In 2003, an ordinary pizza delivery turned into one of the strangest criminal cases America had ever seen. Brian Wells, a pizza delivery driver in Erie, Pennsylvania, entered a bank with a bomb locked around his neck and demanded money. Minutes later, surrounded by police, Wells insisted he had been forced into the robbery by others. Officers watched helplessly as the explosive device detonated before bomb technicians could reach him. At first, the entire case seemed impossible to understand. Investigators spent years unraveling a bizarre conspiracy involving homemade scavenger hunts, elaborate written instructions, multiple conspirators, and conflicting stories about whether Wells had knowingly participated or become an unwilling pawn. The investigation eventually resulted in several convictions, but many details remain debated to this day. The so-called pizza bomber case exposed how unusually complex criminal conspiracies could overwhelm investigators and highlighted the need for closer coordination between bomb squads, hostage negotiators, forensic specialists, and federal agencies when crimes refuse to follow any familiar pattern. 21. In 1972, 3 ordinary burglars broke into the headquarters of the United California Bank in Laguna Niguel, California, expecting an easy fortune. What they actually pulled off became one of the largest bank burglaries in American history. Rather than storming the vault with guns, they rented a nearby office, carefully studied the bank's routines, and eventually tunneled into the vault through the building itself. Once inside, they disabled alarms and escaped with an estimated $30 million in cash, valuables, and safe deposit box contents. For a while, it looked like the perfect crime. Then one of the burglars made a mistake so ordinary it almost seems unbelievable. He began spending money far beyond his normal lifestyle, attracting investigators who eventually connected the entire crew to the robbery. The case exposed serious weaknesses in physical bank security and encouraged financial institutions to improve alarm systems, motion detectors, vault monitoring, and building inspections. Sometimes criminals spend months defeating sophisticated security systems, only to be caught because they suddenly decide everyone needs to see their brand new luxury car. 22. During the 1980s, one tiny piece of computer code quietly became one of America's most expensive crimes. The Morris worm, released in 1988 by graduate student Robert Tappan Morris, wasn't designed to destroy data. It was intended to measure the size of the growing internet. Unfortunately, a programming mistake caused the worm to repeatedly infect the same computers, slowing thousands of systems until many simply crashed. Universities, military networks, and research laboratories suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by a problem nobody had fully anticipated. The internet was still relatively small, but the damage reached millions of dollars as organizations struggled to restore operations. Morris became the first person convicted under the newly enacted Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, making the case a turning point in American cybercrime law. More importantly, it convinced businesses and government agencies that computer networks required the same level of protection as physical buildings. Today, firewalls, cybersecurity teams, and constant software updates feel routine, but many of those habits grew from one accidental digital disaster that proved a keyboard could cause as much chaos as a crowbar. 23. In 1990, two men disguised as police officers walked into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston and calmly told the night guards they were responding to a disturbance. Instead of checking their identification, the guards let them inside. Within minutes, the fake officers handcuffed both guards in the basement and spent over an hour wandering through the museum selecting artwork. When they finally left, they had stolen 13 priceless masterpieces by artists including Rembrandt, Vermeer, Degas, and Manet. The estimated value eventually exceeded $500 million, making it the largest art theft in American history. Decades later, the paintings have never been recovered. The empty frames still hang on the museum walls as silent reminders of what disappeared that night. The robbery dramatically changed museum security across the United States. Institutions expanded surveillance systems, strengthened employee training, improved visitor screening, and upgraded emergency procedures. The case proved that priceless art isn't always stolen through Hollywood explosions and laser beams. Sometimes all it takes is a convincing uniform and someone forgetting the oldest security rule in the world: always ask for identification. 24. In 1978, serial killer Ted Bundy accomplished something almost nobody believed possible. While awaiting trial in Colorado, he escaped not once, but twice. His first escape came after he convinced authorities to let him use a courthouse library, where he simply jumped from a second-story window and disappeared into the surrounding mountains. Captured days later, he somehow escaped again months afterward by sawing through the ceiling of his jail cell, crawling into the building's attic, and slipping out while guards failed to notice he was gone. Bundy eventually reached Florida, where he committed additional murders before his final arrest. The embarrassing escapes forced jails and courthouses across the country to rethink prisoner transport, courtroom security, inmate supervision, and physical building design. Authorities realized dangerous prisoners required far stricter procedures than many facilities had been using. Bundy's escapes remain some of the most infamous failures in American correctional history, proving that overconfidence can become a criminal's greatest ally when security systems assume intelligence only exists on one side of the bars. 25. In 1962, 3 inmates at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary carried out one of the boldest prison escapes America has ever seen. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin spent months secretly widening ventilation openings in their cells using homemade tools crafted from ordinary spoons and stolen materials. To fool nightly inspections, they placed realistic papier-mâché heads with painted hair on their pillows. Once through the walls, they climbed into utility corridors, reached the prison roof, and launched a handmade rubber raft assembled from hundreds of stolen raincoats. Whether they survived the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay remains one of America's greatest criminal mysteries. Their bodies were never found, and the FBI officially closed the investigation years later, while acknowledging no definitive proof of survival existed. The escape exposed weaknesses in maximum security prison design and inspired improvements in inmate monitoring, structural inspections, head counts, and surveillance procedures. Even today, Alcatraz remains famous not simply because prisoners wanted to escape, but because 3 men almost certainly came closer than anyone thought possible. 26. In 1995, Timothy McVeigh parked a rented Ryder truck outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Hidden inside was a massive fertilizer-based bomb that exploded minutes later, killing 168 people, including children inside a daycare center. At the time, it was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. Ironically, McVeigh wasn't caught through sophisticated detective work immediately after the bombing. He had already been pulled over less than 90 minutes later by an Oklahoma state trooper because he was driving without a license plate and illegally carrying a concealed handgun. Initially arrested for unrelated firearm violations, he remained in custody long enough for investigators to connect him to the bombing. The attack transformed domestic security policy across the United States. Federal buildings received stronger physical protection. Vehicle barriers became common around government facilities, emergency response planning improved dramatically, and intelligence agencies expanded efforts to identify domestic extremist threats. One routine traffic stop unexpectedly prevented one of America's most wanted men from disappearing before investigators even knew who they were looking for. 27. In 1968, a simple armored truck delivery turned into one of the strangest hostage situations in American history. At the Bank of America branch in California, criminals attempted an armed robbery that quickly spiraled out of control as police surrounded the building. Television viewers across America watched live as negotiators struggled to end the standoff peacefully. The event became one of the earliest examples of a prolonged hostage crisis receiving non-stop national media attention. Investigators later realized something important. Every police movement broadcast on live television could also be watched by criminals inside the building. This uncomfortable discovery permanently influenced how law enforcement handled media during tactical operations. Police departments gradually developed new rules for controlling information, delaying sensitive broadcasts, and coordinating with journalists during active emergencies. The robbery itself eventually ended, but its lasting impact reached far beyond the stolen money. It demonstrated that modern policing wasn't just about catching criminals anymore. It also involved managing television cameras capable of unintentionally providing suspects with a front-row seat to the police response unfolding outside. 28. In 1974, newspaper heiress Patricia Hearst wasn't the only headline dominating conversations about bizarre crimes. That same decade saw the rise of airplane hijackings so frequent that commercial airlines almost seemed to expect them. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, dozens of aircraft were diverted, many ending up in Cuba after armed passengers demanded pilots change course. Some hijackers wanted political asylum, others wanted ransom money. A few appeared to have no clear plan at all beyond getting somewhere else. The growing wave of hijackings forced the federal government to treat aviation security as a national priority rather than an inconvenience for travelers. Airports installed metal detectors, introduced baggage X-ray systems, required passenger identification, and established stricter boarding procedures. What now feels like an ordinary airport experience was considered remarkably intrusive at the time. Yet public opinion shifted because the alternative had become far worse. Sometimes history changes not because of one spectacular crime, but because the same crime keeps happening until everyone finally agrees the rules have to change. 29. In 2001, Enron wasn't robbed by masked criminals carrying guns. It was quietly dismantled from the inside by executives manipulating financial statements, hiding debt, and creating an illusion of endless success. For years, investors believed the company represented the future of American business. Behind the scenes, executives used complex accounting tricks to conceal enormous losses while encouraging employees and shareholders to keep buying stock. When the deception finally collapsed, thousands of workers lost jobs, retirement savings vanished, and investors suffered billions of dollars in losses. The scandal became one of the largest corporate fraud cases in American history. Public outrage led directly to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which imposed tougher financial reporting standards, strengthened corporate accountability, increased executive responsibility for company records, and expanded penalties for financial fraud. The lesson reached far beyond Wall Street. Americans discovered that white-collar crimes committed in expensive offices could devastate just as many lives as traditional crimes committed with weapons. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a spreadsheet nobody bothers to question. 30. In 1986, one small pharmacy in California became the center of a murder investigation, unlike anything investigators had previously encountered. Pharmacist Robert Courtney wasn't involved, but the earlier Tylenol murders had already convinced Americans that consumer products could become deadly without warning. Throughout the following decades, copycat tampering incidents continued appearing across the country, involving painkillers, beverages, and even everyday grocery items. Although most cases affected far fewer victims than the original Chicago poisonings, together they pushed lawmakers toward even stronger consumer protection laws. Retailers redesigned store shelves, manufacturers improved tamper-evident packaging, and federal penalties for product tampering became dramatically harsher. Consumers gradually developed new habits as well, instinctively checking broken seals or damaged packaging before making purchases. Today, those protective plastic rings, foil barriers, and sealed lids are so common that most people barely notice them anymore. Yet every time someone refuses to buy a bottle because the seal looks suspicious, they're following safety habits created by some of the strangest and most disturbing crimes in modern American history. 31. In 1978, one of the most chilling poisonings in American history didn't happen in a dark alley or during a robbery. It happened because a photographer named Georgy Markov was waiting for a bus in London when he felt a sharp sting in his leg from the tip of an umbrella. Although the crime occurred overseas, it sent shockwaves through American intelligence agencies and law enforcement because it demonstrated how ordinary objects could be transformed into nearly undetectable assassination weapons. The tiny pellet injected into Markov contained ricin, a deadly toxin that left investigators with almost no evidence until forensic specialists uncovered the truth. The murder accelerated American research into biological toxins, improved forensic toxicology, and encouraged stronger coordination between intelligence services and criminal investigators. Federal agencies also expanded training on unconventional weapons and suspicious poisonings. The lesson was unsettling but impossible to ignore. Criminals no longer needed guns or explosives to carry out spectacular crimes. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon looked like something you'd carry on a rainy afternoon. 32. In 1985, one family in California unknowingly became the center of a criminal investigation that would change missing child cases across America. 12-year-old Stephen Stainer had been kidnapped 7 years earlier and raised under a false identity. Instead of remaining hidden forever, Stainer made an extraordinary decision. When his abductor kidnapped another young boy, Stephen realized someone else was about to lose the same childhood he had. He walked the child into a police station and revealed his own true identity, stunning investigators who had considered his disappearance nearly impossible to solve. The case highlighted serious weaknesses in communication between law enforcement agencies handling missing children. Public attention eventually helped strengthen national missing person databases, encouraged wider use of age progression technology, and contributed to better coordination among police departments across state lines. The story wasn't simply about one remarkable escape. It reminded America that many kidnapped children remained missing for years, and that improving communication between investigators could be just as important as finding better detectives. 33. In 1934, America witnessed one of the most famous manhunts in FBI history when agents tracked down notorious bank robber John Dillinger. Unlike earlier generations of criminals who could disappear by simply crossing county lines, Dillinger faced an increasingly modern federal investigation using fingerprints, coordinated intelligence, interstate communication, and nationwide publicity. His robbery spree made him a celebrity during the Great Depression, with newspapers often portraying him almost like a movie star. But behind the headlines stood a far more organized law enforcement effort than America had ever seen. After Dillinger was located outside Chicago's Biograph Theater, federal agents ended his criminal career in a dramatic shooting that instantly became national news. His crimes accelerated the FBI's transformation into a modern investigative agency capable of pursuing dangerous fugitives across multiple states. The era of local sheriffs handling every major criminal alone was rapidly disappearing. America was beginning to understand that organized crime required organized law enforcement with national reach. 34. In 1976, New York City was paralyzed by fear as a mysterious gunman calling himself the Son of Sam targeted young couples sitting in parked cars. David Berkowitz sent taunting letters to police and newspapers, mocking investigators while the public desperately searched for answers. Panic spread across the city. People changed hairstyles, avoided dating at night, canceled outdoor events, and treated every strange noise as a possible gunshot. The breakthrough came through surprisingly ordinary detective work. After one attack, investigators traced parking tickets issued near the crime scene and discovered a suspicious vehicle registered to Berkowitz. That simple clue led police directly to the killer. The investigation highlighted the growing importance of behavioral profiling, centralized case management, and public tip lines. It also demonstrated that even high-profile serial murder cases often end not with dramatic confessions or lucky accidents, but through patient detectives following paperwork that most people would have ignored without a second glance. 35. In 1996, the bombing during the Summer Olympics in Atlanta exposed a challenge American law enforcement still faces today: solving a major crime while the entire world is watching. A pipe bomb exploded inside Centennial Olympic Park, killing 2 people and injuring more than 100 others. In the chaotic days that followed, security guard Richard Jewell was wrongly identified as the primary suspect after he had actually helped evacuate people before the explosion. The intense media attention turned his life upside down long before investigators admitted they had focused on the wrong man. Years later, authorities identified Eric Rudolph as the bomber after an extensive nationwide manhunt. The case forced law enforcement agencies and news organizations to reconsider how quickly names should be released during active investigations. It also highlighted the importance of carefully separating evidence from public speculation. Once a person's reputation is damaged on national television, proving innocence often takes far longer than making the original accusation. 36. In 2013, hackers accomplished something that once seemed impossible. They stole payment card information from approximately 40 million customers during the Target data breach, one of the largest retail cybercrimes in American history. Instead of smashing display cases or emptying cash registers, the attackers entered through the company's computer network after compromising credentials belonging to a third-party contractor. From there, they quietly installed malicious software that captured customer payment information as purchases were processed. Millions of shoppers who had done nothing more suspicious than buying holiday gifts suddenly faced fraudulent charges and identity theft concerns. The breach transformed how major retailers approach cybersecurity. Companies accelerated investment in encrypted payment systems, chip-enabled credit cards, network monitoring, vendor security requirements, and rapid breach notification procedures. The crime demonstrated that modern thieves no longer needed masks or getaway cars. Sometimes they simply needed patience, technical knowledge, and an internet connection capable of reaching thousands of checkout counters without leaving fingerprints. 37. In 1989, a quiet office worker named Betty Vinson became an unlikely participant in one of America's largest corporate frauds at WorldCom. Executives pressured employees to manipulate financial records, turning accounting departments into unwilling participants in a scheme that concealed billions of dollars in losses. Many workers later admitted they knew something felt wrong but feared losing their jobs if they refused. When the fraud finally collapsed in 2002, WorldCom became one of the biggest corporate bankruptcies in American history. The scandal reinforced lessons already emerging after Enron and accelerated demands for stronger internal financial controls, whistleblower protections, and executive accountability. Regulators realized that white-collar crime often succeeds because ordinary employees remain silent under enormous pressure. The case reminded America that financial fraud rarely begins with one spectacular decision. Instead, it grows through countless small compromises made by people who convince themselves someone else must surely know what they're doing. Sometimes the biggest crimes happen one spreadsheet at a time. 38. In 1949, one prison riot inside Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania became a wake-up call for correctional officials across the country. Overcrowding, poor living conditions, and outdated security procedures had created an explosive environment where violence became increasingly difficult to control. When inmates revolted, authorities eventually restored order, but the event exposed deeper structural problems affecting prisons nationwide. Similar disturbances during the following decades encouraged policymakers to reconsider inmate classification systems, emergency response planning, prison architecture, and staff training. Correctional institutions gradually adopted better communication systems, specialized tactical teams, and more detailed contingency plans for hostage situations and riots. Although prison violence never disappeared, administrators increasingly recognized that simply building stronger walls wasn't enough. Managing correctional facilities required understanding human behavior, intelligence gathering, and crisis planning. The riot demonstrated that preventing future violence often depended less on harsher punishment and more on recognizing problems before frustration reached a breaking point. 39. In 2008, Bernard Madoff confessed to operating the largest Ponzi scheme in American history, stealing an estimated $65 billion on paper from thousands of investors who believed they had found the safest manager on Wall Street. Unlike dramatic bank robbers, Madoff built trust through decades of apparent success, impressive offices, and a reputation that discouraged difficult questions. Clients believed steady profits meant brilliant investing. In reality, new investors' money simply paid earlier investors, while fake account statements created the illusion of enormous returns. When the financial crisis forced too many people to withdraw funds at once, the entire scheme collapsed almost overnight. The scandal exposed failures in regulatory oversight and encouraged stronger examination procedures by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Financial institutions also expanded fraud detection systems and due diligence requirements. Madoff proved that one of history's biggest financial crimes required no disguises, no weapons, and no midnight break-ins. Sometimes wearing an expensive suit inspires far more trust than it deserves. 40. In 1982, Chicago's Tylenol poisonings changed consumer safety forever, but another lesson emerged in the years that followed. Investigators discovered how quickly fear itself could spread when people lost confidence in everyday products. False reports of contaminated food, medicine, and household goods appeared across the country, forcing law enforcement agencies to investigate countless hoaxes alongside genuine threats. These copycat incidents prompted Congress to strengthen federal product tampering laws in 1983, making intentional contamination and even false tampering threats serious federal crimes. Manufacturers invested heavily in quality control, retailers improved product monitoring, and consumers learned to inspect packaging before making purchases. The lasting impact reached far beyond one medicine bottle. It fundamentally changed the relationship between manufacturers and the public, creating an expectation that companies must design products to reveal even the smallest sign of interference. Today, opening a bottle often feels like solving a small puzzle with multiple seals and protective layers. It may seem inconvenient, but those extra seconds exist because America once learned, in the hardest possible way, that trust sometimes needs visible proof. 41. In 1993, 6 men parked a rented Ryder truck beneath the North Tower of the World Trade Center and detonated a massive bomb containing more than 1,000 pounds of explosives. Their goal wasn't simply to damage the building. Investigators later learned the terrorists hoped the North Tower would collapse into the South Tower, causing catastrophic destruction. Instead, the explosion ripped through several underground levels, killed 6 people, injured more than 1,000 others, and left smoke-filling stairwells as thousands struggled to escape. The attack exposed serious weaknesses in security planning for major commercial buildings. Emergency lighting, evacuation procedures, communication systems, and structural safety measures all came under intense review. Many companies also realized employees needed regular emergency drills, rather than assuming everyone would instinctively know what to do during a disaster. Although the towers remained standing that day, the bombing served as an unmistakable warning that terrorists had begun targeting symbolic American landmarks. Sadly, many lessons learned in 1993 would become even more significant less than a decade later. 42. In 1971, one ordinary night at New York City's Attica Correctional Facility exploded into one of the deadliest prison uprisings in American history. More than 1,000 inmates seized control of parts of the prison, taking dozens of correctional officers hostage while demanding better living conditions, medical care, educational opportunities, and basic human rights. Negotiations stretched over several tense days before authorities ordered a massive assault involving state police and correctional officers. The operation ended the rebellion, but resulted in the deaths of 39 people, including both inmates and hostages. Public reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Some focused on restoring order, while others questioned whether the response had used unnecessary force. The tragedy forced correctional systems across the country to examine prison management, crisis negotiation, hostage procedures, and inmate conditions more carefully than ever before. Attica demonstrated that prison security involves far more than locked doors and concrete walls. Ignoring long-term problems inside correctional facilities can eventually create emergencies that become far more dangerous than addressing those issues early. 43. In 1984, residents of the Dalles, Oregon, experienced one of the strangest criminal plots ever carried out on American soil. Members of the Rajneeshi religious movement wanted to influence a local election by reducing voter turnout. Instead of stuffing ballot boxes or intimidating voters, they chose an almost unbelievable method. Followers intentionally contaminated salad bars at several restaurants with salmonella bacteria. More than 700 people became ill, making it the largest bioterrorism attack in United States history. At first, health officials believed the outbreak was a natural case of food poisoning. Only months later did investigators uncover evidence proving the contamination had been deliberate. The case transformed how public health agencies and law enforcement cooperated during unusual disease outbreaks. Epidemiologists, criminal investigators, laboratories, and intelligence agencies developed closer working relationships, recognizing that some public health emergencies could actually be crimes. Today, suspicious outbreaks are investigated far more carefully because one bizarre election scheme demonstrated that germs could become weapons in the hands of determined criminals. 44. In 2001, federal investigators uncovered one of the largest insider trading scandals involving Martha Stewart, although the underlying crime appeared surprisingly ordinary compared to violent offenses. Stewart sold nearly 4,000 shares of biotechnology company ImClone Systems just before negative regulatory news caused the stock price to collapse. The real legal trouble didn't arise simply because she sold the stock. Investigators concluded she lied to federal authorities during the investigation, turning what might have remained a financial inquiry into a criminal prosecution. The case became front-page news because Stewart was one of America's most recognizable business personalities, proving that celebrity status offered little protection when federal investigators believed false statements had been made. Public attention reinforced the importance of truthful cooperation during criminal investigations and reminded executives that white-collar crimes could carry serious prison sentences. The scandal also encouraged corporations to strengthen ethics training, insider trading compliance programs, and record-keeping practices. Sometimes a cover-up creates far greater legal consequences than the original decision that investigators wanted to understand. 45. During the late 1990s, identity theft quietly became one of America's fastest-growing crimes. Unlike traditional thieves who stole wallets or purses, criminals increasingly realized that a stolen social security number, credit application, or discarded bank statement could generate far greater profits. Victims often discovered the crime months later after receiving collection notices for loans they had never requested or credit cards they had never opened. As internet use expanded, identity thieves gained even more opportunities to collect personal information through phishing emails, hacked databases, and fraudulent websites. Congress responded by passing stronger identity theft laws, while financial institutions introduced fraud monitoring systems, credit freezes, and more sophisticated customer verification procedures. Credit bureaus also developed easier methods for consumers to report suspicious activity. Today, many Americans routinely shred financial documents, monitor credit reports, and use two-factor authentication without giving those habits much thought. Those precautions became common because criminals discovered that stealing someone's identity could sometimes be far easier and more profitable than stealing cash. 46. In 1964, New York City witnessed a murder that permanently changed how police handle emergency calls and public awareness campaigns. When Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, early newspaper reports claimed dozens of neighbors witnessed the assault without helping or calling police. Although later investigations showed the original reporting greatly exaggerated what witnesses actually knew, the story captured public imagination and sparked widespread discussion about human behavior during emergencies. Psychologists began studying what eventually became known as the bystander effect, examining why people sometimes hesitate to intervene when others are present. Police departments also increased public education, encouraging citizens to immediately report crimes rather than assuming someone else had already done so. Emergency communication systems gradually improved, and 911 services later expanded nationwide, making it easier for witnesses to quickly contact authorities. Even though parts of the original story were later corrected, the case still influenced decades of research into public safety, emergency response, and individual responsibility during criminal incidents. 47. In 1987, 19-year-old Christopher Knight walked into the headquarters of Pacific Bell in California with a homemade computer virus hidden on floppy disks. The malware spread through company systems, disrupting operations and revealing how vulnerable modern businesses had become to digital attacks. Unlike today's sophisticated ransomware groups, early computer criminals often worked alone, motivated by curiosity, experimentation, or the challenge of bypassing security rather than massive financial rewards. Even so, incidents like these convinced corporations that protecting computer networks required specialized expertise rather than ordinary information technology staff. Businesses began hiring dedicated cybersecurity professionals, installing intrusion detection systems, and developing incident response plans for digital emergencies. Prosecutors also became increasingly experienced in pursuing computer-related offenses under evolving federal cybercrime laws. Cases from the early days of personal computing may seem almost primitive compared to today's cyber attacks, but they established many of the legal foundations that still govern digital investigations. The keyboard was quickly becoming as important to modern criminals as the crowbar had once been. 48. In 1973, authorities investigating the kidnapping of oil executive Paul Getty III in Italy watched events unfold from across the Atlantic, with growing concern because the case reshaped thinking about ransom payments worldwide, including in the United States. Criminal organizations realized wealthy families could become profitable targets if relatives were willing to pay enormous sums for safe returns. American law enforcement agencies increasingly developed specialized kidnapping response units, negotiation strategies, and policies discouraging uncontrolled ransom negotiations. Investigators also recognized that families facing unimaginable pressure required professional guidance, rather than trying to negotiate directly with dangerous criminals. Advances in hostage negotiation, behavioral analysis, and financial tracking grew from lessons learned in high-profile kidnapping investigations both inside and outside the United States. Although every case differed, authorities increasingly treated kidnappings as highly organized investigations, requiring coordination among local police, federal agents, psychologists, financial experts, and communication specialists. The crime reminded investigators that saving lives often depended as much on patience and strategy as on dramatic rescue operations. 49. In 2005, one of the largest data theft cases in American history unfolded almost invisibly. Hackers infiltrated payment processing company Card System Solutions and compromised information connected to more than 40 million payment cards. Unlike dramatic robberies involving smashed windows or armed guards, this crime unfolded silently across computer servers, while customers continued shopping without suspecting anything unusual. Banks soon detected waves of fraudulent transactions, triggering one of the largest financial investigations ever conducted into payment card fraud. The breach accelerated the nationwide transition toward stronger payment security standards, improved encryption, stricter compliance requirements for merchants, and enhanced cooperation between banks, payment processors, and law enforcement. Credit card companies also expanded real-time fraud detection systems capable of recognizing suspicious purchases within seconds. The incident demonstrated that protecting financial information had become just as important as protecting physical cash inside bank vaults. In the digital age, criminals no longer needed to steal your wallet if they could quietly copy everything inside it. 50. In 1979, a single false confession almost changed an entire murder investigation before determined detectives refused to stop asking questions. The case involved the disappearance of 6-year-old Eaton Patz in New York City, one of America's most influential missing child investigations. Over the years, multiple individuals falsely confessed to involvement, creating confusion that repeatedly sent investigators down dead ends. The extraordinary case highlighted how unreliable confessions can sometimes be, particularly when mental illness, publicity, or suggestive questioning become factors. Eventually, decades later, Pedro Hernandez was convicted for Eaton's murder, but only after investigators carefully supported his statements with additional evidence rather than relying solely on the confession itself. The long investigation influenced how detectives evaluate admissions of guilt, especially in cold cases attracting enormous public attention. It also helped inspire major changes in missing child awareness, including the widespread use of photographs on milk cartons during the 1980s and eventually the creation of more advanced national missing children databases. Sometimes solving a crime means learning that the loudest confession isn't always the truthful one. 51. In 1986, Miami's notorious River Cops scandal exposed a kind of crime that Americans rarely expect from the people sworn to stop it. Several officers from the Miami Police Department's Crime Suppression Unit discovered that drug traffickers often hid huge amounts of cash inside abandoned boats drifting in Biscayne Bay. Instead of reporting every discovery as evidence, some officers quietly pocketed portions of the money, believing nobody would ever notice because the cash belonged to criminals in the first place. That logic collapsed when investigators uncovered missing evidence, suspicious financial records, and testimony from fellow officers. The scandal deeply damaged public trust and forced police departments nationwide to tighten evidence handling procedures, require stricter financial audits, expand internal affairs investigations, and increase oversight of narcotics units. It reminded Americans that accountability cannot stop at the station house door. Law enforcement agencies realized that fighting organized crime also meant protecting themselves against corruption from within. The badge remained a symbol of public trust, But this case proved that trust requires constant verification, not blind faith. 52. In 1997, one of the largest armored car robberies in American history unfolded without a single dramatic Hollywood chase. At a Loomis Fargo vault in Charlotte, North Carolina, employee David Gant quietly loaded more than $17 million into a company van and drove away with the help of several co-conspirators. The plan itself was surprisingly simple, but what happened afterward became almost comical. Instead of lying low, members of the group immediately began buying luxury homes, expensive cars, jewelry, and lavish vacations. One conspirator reportedly purchased gold-plated household items, while another spent enormous sums on cosmetic surgery and luxury shopping. Investigators barely needed advanced forensic techniques because the robbers practically advertised their success. The case reinforced a timeless truth that investigators have repeated for generations. Criminals often survive the robbery but fail the spending spree. The spectacular purchases attracted attention that careful planning never anticipated. Financial investigators tracked unusual transactions, followed the money, and gradually dismantled the entire conspiracy, proving once again that greed usually arrives long before common sense. 53. In 1981, a simple assassination attempt outside a Washington hotel permanently changed how the United States protects its president. John Hinckley Jr. fired 6 shots at President Ronald Reagan, seriously wounding the president, Press Secretary James Brady, a police officer, and a Secret Service agent. Reagan survived after doctors discovered a bullet had narrowly missed his heart, but the attack exposed several weaknesses in close protection procedures. Secret Service agents immediately reviewed motorcade operations, crowd management, emergency evacuation plans, and communication systems. Hospitals near presidential events also became more closely integrated into advanced security planning. Although the crime targeted one individual, its consequences reached far beyond the White House. Protective intelligence, rapid medical response, and coordinated emergency planning all evolved significantly after the shooting. The attack also sparked national debate over mental illness and firearms, while the Brady family later became central figures in efforts to strengthen background checks for gun purchases. One chaotic afternoon outside a hotel reshaped presidential security for every administration that followed. 54. During the late 1970s, the New York Mafia Commission quietly controlled organized crime across much of the Northeast. Rather than fighting constant gang wars, leaders from the 5 families met to resolve disputes, approve murders, divide criminal territory, and coordinate illegal businesses ranging from gambling to labor racketeering. For years, prosecutors understood the organization existed but struggled to prove its structure inside a courtroom. That changed dramatically in the mid-1980s when the FBI combined surveillance, electronic recordings, financial investigations, and testimony from cooperating witnesses to build the landmark Mafia Commission trial. Instead of prosecuting isolated crimes, federal prosecutors demonstrated that organized crime itself functioned like a criminal corporation with executives making strategic decisions. The convictions weakened traditional mafia leadership and expanded the government's use of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, better known as RICO. The case transformed organized crime prosecutions across America by allowing investigators to target entire criminal enterprises instead of chasing individual offenses one arrest at a time. 55. In 2002, the disappearance of teenager Elizabeth Smart from her family's home in Salt Lake City reminded Americans that even high-profile kidnapping investigations could have surprisingly ordinary breakthroughs. For months, thousands of tips flooded investigators, yet the case remained unsolved. Then, 9 months after the abduction, Smart was spotted walking alongside her captors in public. Several people recognized her from extensive media coverage and immediately contacted police. Investigators safely recovered her, arrested Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee, and closed one of the nation's most closely watched missing child cases. The investigation reinforced the enormous value of public awareness campaigns, accurate suspect sketches, and rapid nationwide media distribution. It also encouraged law enforcement agencies to improve coordination with organizations specializing in missing children while expanding the use of age-progressed photographs and national alert systems. Sometimes solving a complex kidnapping does not depend on advanced forensic technology. Sometimes it depends on ordinary citizens paying attention, trusting their instincts, and making one phone call that changes everything. 56. In 1984, federal investigators launched Operation Greylord, one of the most ambitious anti-corruption investigations ever conducted inside the American court system. For years, rumors had circulated that judges, lawyers, court employees, and police officers in Cook County, Illinois, accepted bribes to fix cases, reduce sentences, or dismiss charges altogether. Rather than relying on speculation, the FBI secretly recorded conversations, used undercover agents posing as corrupt attorneys, and patiently gathered evidence over several years. The results shocked the nation. More than 90 officials were eventually convicted, including judges who had literally auctioned justice to the highest bidder. The scandal demonstrated that corruption could quietly infect every level of the legal system if left unchecked. Courts responded by strengthening judicial ethics rules, increasing oversight, improving disciplinary procedures, and encouraging anonymous reporting of misconduct. Americans often assume justice begins inside the courtroom. Operation Greylord proved that protecting justice sometimes requires investigating the very people responsible for delivering it. 57. In 1995, authorities arrested Theodore Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, ending one of the longest and most unusual bombing investigations in FBI history. For nearly 18 years, homemade explosive devices had been mailed to universities, airlines, professors, scientists, and business executives, killing 3 people and injuring dozens more. What finally broke the case was not a fingerprint or a dramatic surveillance operation. It was language. After newspapers published Kaczynski's lengthy manifesto, his brother recognized the distinctive writing style and quietly contacted investigators despite the devastating personal consequences. Linguists, behavioral analysts, and investigators compared the manifesto with older family letters, ultimately helping establish Kaczynski's identity. The investigation highlighted the growing importance of forensic linguistics, behavioral profiling, and public cooperation in solving long-term serial crimes. Sometimes criminals leave evidence not through physical objects, but through the words they choose. In this remarkable case, grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structure proved almost as valuable as fingerprints. 58. In 1978, American investigators began paying much closer attention to financial crime after the Bank Secrecy Act and later amendments dramatically expanded reporting requirements for suspicious cash transactions. Criminal organizations had become remarkably skilled at disguising illegal profits by moving money through businesses, casinos, banks, and shell companies. Investigators realized that following cash often revealed far more than chasing individual criminals. Drug traffickers, organized crime families, tax evaders, and fraudsters all depended on moving money without attracting attention. Financial institutions gradually introduced suspicious activity reports, currency transaction reporting, and stronger customer identification procedures. These changes transformed banking into one of law enforcement's most valuable investigative tools. Criminals who carefully erased fingerprints sometimes forgot that every dollar leaves its own trail. Today, financial investigators routinely reconstruct complex criminal networks by examining transactions rather than crime scenes. It is a reminder that modern investigations often begin with accountants, auditors, and spreadsheets long before detectives ever knock on someone's front door. 59. In 2006, authorities uncovered one of the largest art forgery operations ever prosecuted in the United States. Unlike traditional art thieves who steal priceless paintings, forgers manufacture entirely new masterpieces, complete with fake histories, forged signatures, and convincing documentation. Buyers often believe they are purchasing rare works by famous artists, sometimes paying millions of dollars before experts uncover inconsistencies hidden inside pigments, canvas fibers, or historical records. High-profile forgery investigations encouraged museums, auction houses, collectors, and galleries to adopt far stricter authentication procedures. Scientific testing became increasingly common, with laboratories analyzing paint composition, microscopic brushstrokes, and material age before valuable works changed hands. The cases reminded collectors that confidence and expensive price tags are poor substitutes for evidence. A convincing story can add millions to a painting's value, but a single laboratory test can erase that fortune overnight. Criminals discovered that forging history is sometimes more profitable than stealing it, at least until science catches up. 60. In 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil spill was investigated primarily as an environmental disaster, but it also triggered criminal proceedings that permanently changed how corporations approach environmental responsibility in the United States. After the oil tanker struck Bligh Reef in Alaska, millions of gallons of crude oil spilled into Prince William Sound, devastating wildlife and local communities. Federal investigators examined not only the accident itself, but also questions involving negligence, alcohol policies, safety procedures, and corporate responsibility. Exxon ultimately faced criminal penalties, civil settlements, and massive cleanup costs that reached billions of dollars. The disaster led to the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which strengthened spill prevention requirements, increased corporate liability, improved emergency response planning, and accelerated the phase-out of single-hull oil tankers in American waters. The lesson extended far beyond the shipping industry. Companies across multiple sectors recognized that ignoring safety procedures could become both an environmental catastrophe and a criminal investigation. Sometimes one accident changes the law because the cost of repeating it becomes simply too high. 61 in 1972, three seemingly ordinary burglars broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters inside the Watergate complex, expecting a routine espionage mission. Instead, they triggered a political earthquake that permanently transformed American government. At first, the break-in looked almost insignificant compared to violent crimes making headlines that year. The burglars carried cameras, bugging devices, and rolls of cash rather than machine guns. But investigators kept asking one uncomfortable question: who had sent them? What followed was an extraordinary chain of investigative journalism, FBI interviews, congressional hearings, secret White House recordings, and criminal prosecutions that reached the highest levels of government. Dozens of officials were convicted of crimes ranging from conspiracy to obstruction of justice, and President Richard Nixon resigned before facing almost certain impeachment. Watergate also produced lasting legal reforms involving campaign finance, ethics rules, transparency requirements, and congressional oversight. The case demonstrated that crimes committed with pens, tape recorders, and shredded documents can sometimes reshape a nation more dramatically than crimes committed with bullets. America learned that covering up misconduct often becomes a far bigger scandal than the original offense itself. 62. In 1975, investigators in Arizona uncovered one of the strangest insurance fraud schemes ever prosecuted. The case involved John Darwin, not the later British disappearance case, but several American conspiracies during the decade that relied on staged deaths, fake identities, and fraudulent insurance claims. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, authorities across the United States noticed a growing number of elaborate fraud attempts involving falsified accident reports, fake drowning victims, staged airplane crashes, and fabricated disappearances. These increasingly sophisticated crimes forced insurance companies to build specialized fraud investigation units staffed by former detectives, forensic accountants, and document examiners. Companies also began sharing suspicious claim information with one another rather than investigating cases in isolation. State fraud bureaus expanded dramatically, while prosecutors pushed for tougher penalties against organized insurance fraud rings. The lesson became obvious. Criminals no longer viewed insurance companies as impossible targets, but as giant vaults filled with paperwork instead of cash. Fortunately for investigators, fake accidents often leave behind very real mistakes that eventually expose even the most carefully planned deception. 63. In 1996, a quiet security guard named Richard Jewell went from hero to suspect almost overnight after discovering the backpack bomb at Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park. Jewell immediately alerted police, helped evacuate spectators, and almost certainly saved dozens of lives before the explosion occurred. Yet only days later, anonymous leaks suggested he might actually be the bomber seeking attention for his own heroic actions. The media frenzy was relentless. Television crews camped outside his home, while newspapers treated speculation as established fact. Months later, investigators officially cleared Jewell after finding no evidence linking him to the attack. The actual bomber, Eric Rudolph, remained free for years before finally being captured in North Carolina. Jewell's ordeal permanently influenced how federal investigators handled high-profile investigations involving persons of interest. Law enforcement agencies became more cautious about premature leaks, while journalists faced growing criticism for reporting unverified suspicions as headlines. The case remains a powerful reminder that public opinion can convict someone long before a courtroom ever has the chance to examine the evidence. 64. In 1985, authorities uncovered one of the largest automobile theft operations ever prosecuted in the United States. Organized criminal groups had discovered that stealing entire vehicles was no longer their most profitable business. Instead, they dismantled stolen cars into hundreds of individual components that were shipped across state lines and sold through seemingly legitimate repair shops. Engines, transmissions, airbags, doors, electronics, and identification plates could generate far greater profits than selling an intact stolen vehicle. Investigators responded by developing the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System, improving vehicle identification number tracking, and encouraging manufacturers to stamp VIN numbers onto multiple hidden vehicle components rather than placing them in only one location. Police agencies also expanded interstate cooperation because stolen parts frequently crossed several jurisdictions before reaching buyers. Today's anti-theft technology, including immobilizers, electronic keys, GPS recovery systems, and computerized VIN databases, owes much of its existence to criminal organizations that once treated American parking lots as enormous self-service warehouses filled with expensive inventory waiting to disappear overnight. 65. In 2015, hackers carried out one of the most damaging cyber espionage operations ever revealed against the United States government when they breached the Office of Personnel Management. Although widely regarded as an intelligence operation rather than conventional criminal activity, the attack exposed the personal records of more than 20 million current, former, and prospective federal employees. Social security numbers, fingerprints, security clearance applications, addresses, family histories, and deeply personal background investigation records suddenly became vulnerable. The breach shocked officials because the stolen information wasn't simply financial. It represented a detailed map of the federal workforce itself. In response, agencies accelerated cybersecurity modernization, expanded continuous network monitoring, strengthened identity verification, adopted multi-factor authentication, and increased funding for digital infrastructure. The incident permanently changed how the federal government approached data protection. America realized that the most valuable target inside many government buildings was no longer locked inside a vault. It was quietly stored inside computer servers where invisible intruders could steal millions of files without ever opening a single door. 66. In 1978, federal prosecutors achieved a historic victory by using the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, better known as RICO, in increasingly ambitious ways against organized crime families. Before RICO, investigators often arrested individual mob members for isolated crimes like extortion, gambling, or loan sharking while the leaders remained safely insulated from direct involvement. The new law allowed prosecutors to demonstrate that criminal organizations functioned as coordinated enterprises whose leaders could be held responsible for patterns of illegal activity committed by subordinates. Throughout the following decade, major mafia bosses who had once seemed untouchable suddenly found themselves facing sweeping federal indictments. The law permanently changed organized crime investigations by encouraging long-term undercover operations, electronic surveillance, financial analysis, and cooperation from former insiders willing to testify. RICO later expanded beyond traditional mafia cases into prosecutions involving gangs, corporate fraud, public corruption, and sophisticated criminal enterprises. Rather than chasing hundreds of individual crimes separately, investigators learned they could dismantle the entire organization by proving the criminal business itself existed. 67. In 2001, the anthrax letter attacks reminded America that some of the most terrifying crimes don't require large bombs or massive armies. Just weeks after the September 11 terrorist attacks, envelopes containing anthrax spores were mailed to news organizations and U.S. senators, killing 5 people and infecting 17 others. Postal workers, journalists, government employees, and ordinary citizens suddenly viewed every unfamiliar envelope with suspicion. Entire office buildings closed while hazardous materials teams responded to powder-filled packages that often turned out to be harmless hoaxes. The FBI launched one of the largest and longest investigations in its history, eventually concluding that government scientist Bruce Ivins was responsible, although aspects of the case remain debated by some observers. Regardless of the lingering controversy, the attacks fundamentally changed how America handles suspicious mail. Postal screening systems became far more sophisticated, biological detection technology expanded, emergency response protocols improved, and coordination between public health officials and law enforcement reached an entirely new level. Few crimes have demonstrated so clearly that something as ordinary as opening the morning mail can unexpectedly become a matter of national security. After hearing all 67 stories, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. America's biggest legal changes rarely began inside a courtroom. They started with crimes so strange, shocking, or unbelievable that lawmakers had no choice but to rewrite the rules. Which case surprised you the most, and which one do you think changed the country forever? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories.